Hello, guys and gals, and welcome. So, since you guys enjoyed my top 10 worst uniques, I decided to broaden this into a new category and came up with a couple more top 10 worst lists for Diablo 2. So today we're going to be going over the top 10 worst rune words in Diablo 2. And I'm not going to rank them, just like I didn't rank them in the top worst unique list, because, well, we don't compare turds. Like I'm not trying to compare a turd and see which one's got like a better brown color or which one has nuts or corn in it. These are horrible rune words, and for the most part, they basically don't deserve ranking. Let's start with one of the ones that almost didn't make the list, and this is Holy Thunder. Now, Holy Thunder is a rune word that, for some reason or another, was designed in a way that is next to impossible to actually utilize when you would want to use it. Is the rune word bad? Not necessarily. The rune word actually does have a lot of good modifiers on it, and if made in a low enough base at a low enough level, could potentially be quite an effective weapon for a paladin early on, especially considering it has +3 to Holy Shock on it, and you could potentially find a base that has +3 to Holy Shock as well, bringing it up to a maximum of +6 to Holy Shock, which is probably the best you're ever going to get on a single item. Unless, of course, you happen to find like a god tier, like +3 offensive auras, +3 Holy Shock. Actually, even that would only be 6, wouldn't it? The problem with Holy Thunder, and the reason why it made the list, is because it is 4 sockets. So, Cody, quit digging. Thank you. Cody's digging in the background here. You got to stop digging, buddy. Don't give me that little cute eyeballs. So the reason why Holy Thunder made the list is because it's 4 sockets. In normal difficulty, you literally cannot get a 4-socket item to actually fall for you. You can, however, Larzik an item to 4 sockets, and usually by the time you actually have access to this recipe and actually can make it, you're in nightmare difficulty. You're moving on in like to level 30, level 40. You're getting to the point where this item becomes less and less useful. You've started to get access to other items that have plus to skills, better physical damage, Crescent Moon, which is obviously way better for instance, a Holy Shock Paladin. And in general, the main issue of this rune word is just simply the fact that it cannot be made, for the most part, by just about anybody that wants to make it as they're leveling up in the game. One of the things that they really need to do with this recipe is they really need to shorten it by 1 rune. It can remain Ethereal Ort or Ethereal Tal, probably Ethereal Ort because it's a lightning damage item. And they can add the poison damage in, like back in if they want to. But the thing is that because it is 4 sockets, it ruins the rune word. It's a low-level rune word that is meant to be used by low-level characters, and for the most part, nobody ever gets access to it or uses it because you really can't get your hands on a War Scepter that early that has 4 sockets with the right number of skills. And that's another big issue, is that it's not just finding a War Scepter, because you don't really just make Holy Thunder in a random War Scepter. You need to find a specific white War Scepter or a specific Divine Scepter, and you need to have the right plus to skills on it, and all of that boils down to it's basically impossible. Like, you just really can't get your hands on this. The only time I've ever used this rune word was when I was a high-level character. I deliberately spent like an entire day farming a base, created the rune word in the base, and gave it to a lower level character. And that's the only time you will ever use this rune word. And most people don't even know that this rune word even exists because of how uncommonly rare it is to actually use this on a character. So Holy Thunder does make it on the list as one of the worst rune words in the game. However, I do think that if they just removed 1 rune, turned it into a 3-socket rune word instead of a 4-socket rune word, it could potentially come back to life. And I'd also like to see it drop maybe like a couple levels, down to like maybe level 20 instead of level 24. Give it a little bit more space before you get access to some of the higher level rune words. The next on the list is Enlightenment. Now, when they added all of the armor plus to skill recipes, they added a bunch of them, and a lot of them are good. Peace is very good. Um, Principle didn't used to be good, but became good with the changes that they made to Holy Bolt. And a lot of the rune words that are like this, like Rain and Peace and Principle, do have good uses within the game. Enlightenment, on the other hand, is really weird. Um, it has +2 sorceress skills, but it also costs a pull rune. Unlike a lot of the other recipes in this category, the main issue with this is that it's kind of expensive for an early game +2 skill armor. Things like Peace and Myth and whatnot tend to cost a lot less. Principle's the only one that's more expensive than this one, and Principle actually has a really good effect, which is the 100% chance to cast Holy Bolt on striking, which does make for a very fun Godzilla or North Star Smiter. This one, on the other hand, has a very low chance to cast Fireball on striking, which is an odd choice for a sorceress. It also has a 5% chance to cast 15 Blaze when struck, which is okay, I guess, if you're building the synergies for that. But Blaze has never been the most amazing ability in the game. And then it has +1 Warmth, which is actually an O skill, which is very strange. A lot of people don't know this about Enlightenment, but the +1 Warmth is actually a O skill and is granted to you, to your character. So you can put a Enlightenment plate, I don't know why you would, but you can put an Enlightenment plate on any character and get +1 to Warmth, and it allows your mana to regenerate faster. And plus to skills does in fact help that, generic plus to skills. So if you have a lot of generic plus to skills, you can actually get a really high level of warmth on a relatively like non regenerating character, which is pretty cool. But as far as this armor goes, it tends not to be used by just about anybody. It's missing the key, like anything, for the sorceress. Yes, it has plus to skills, but it doesn't have resistances, really. It's got 30 fire res, and that's about it. It doesn't have faster cast, which is also a big deterrent. It's also missing basically any other modifier that a sorceress would be interested in, like faster hit recovery, which would be really good. Increase to maximum mana, which would be really good. And the +1 warmth is wholly and pretty much completely useless to the sorceress that already probably has level 20 warmth, because that's one of the easiest things to build on sorceress to cap out their mana. So a combination of things coming down to price, stats, better items around the same level, tons of pieces of equipment that you can potentially use that are better than this, like Kay Hagen's Skin of the Viper Magi, Skulder's Ire, the Tal Rasha's armor combined with other pieces. There's just so many better options other than this. It's pretty much garbage. And that's why it made the top 10 worst items list. Another one of these armors is the Myth armor. Now, the Myth armor is the Barbarian version, and it actually is really, really cheap at Hell Nef Am, so it doesn't really have any expensive runes in it. The main issue with this armor is that it has a hit causes monster to flee on it in the form of a 3% chance to cast level 1 Howl when struck, which basically means that whenever you're utilizing this on a Barbarian, the monsters just randomly hit you and then run away. Melee characters specifically do not like knockback, and they do not like hit causes monster to flee, and Howl is just another form of hit causes monster to flee. It does have +2 barbarian skills, which is very nice, but the barbarian is one of the few classes that literally does not care about plus to skills. There are very few situations, like a Warcry barbarian, or maybe just a barbarian that's specifically being used as a buff stick, like not actually used as a player, but just running like all the shouts with as much plus to skills as you can. There's very few situations where you would want to use Myth over another armor that offers other better effects, like Twitch Throw, which offers increased attack speed, or Treachery, which offers increased attack speed, or Fortitude, which offers increased attack damage. There's a ton of better options for a melee character than a Myth plate. So unfortunately, the Myth armor just kind of completely misses the mark because of a couple reasons. Number one, barbarians just aren't really interested in plus the skills as much as other characters. Number two, a freaking hit causes monster to flee on there that procs constantly whenever monsters are striking you. And as a melee character, you're in range for them to strike you on a regular basis, which means you constantly have monsters running away from you. And the rest of the stats on the armor aren't very good either. Like, it does have some replenished life, That's okay. And it does have a 10% chance to taunt on striking, which is not bad. But taunt also overrides other curses. So if you happen to be using Amplify Damage or Decrepify or any of the other things, like having a taunt randomly overwrite your Decrepify or your Amplify Damage, it's pretty poopy. It's not very fun. And that's one of the reasons why Myth made it into the top 10 worst runewords. Another one of the top 10 worst runewords is the Wrath bow. The Wrath is a rune word that is particularly expensive. At Pul Lum Bur Mal, having not a single low rune in the mix, no Rals, no Tals, no Souls, no Ams, every single rune in that list, with the exception of maybe Lumrune, because Lumrune is pretty easy to come by, but I would consider it in the mid-rune category, less so than the low rune category. Every rune in it is expensive, and the Bur rune, of course, is even more so expensive. And it doesn't really have anything worthwhile on it. First off, and this is the most important thing, the enhanced damage to demons and the enhanced damage to undead is completely and utterly useless because it does not enhance the damage of the bow. It only enhances the damage after the bow applies its minimum and maximum. And this is something that I've demonstrated in previous videos. If you're interested in learning more about this, the more important thing to understand is that you have to have on-weapon enhancement to gain physical damage. If you do not have on-weapon enhancement, you do not have physical damage. That's as simple as it is. And this weapon does not have on-weapon physical enhancement. It only has off-weapon physical enhancement, which means it's basically a Z DPS weapon, which is a 0 physical damage DPS weapon. Now, it does have Decrepify on it, a 30% chance to cast Decrepify, which is pretty neat. And if you were going to use it as a swap to cast Decrepify, that would be kind of cool. However, it's really expensive as a swap to, and there's other potential options that you could use as a swap to that might be better for you. Now, it does have another curse, though, which means that even if you do cast Decrepify on the target, there's every possibility you could also overwrite Decrepify with Life Tap, which would essentially cause the monster to no longer have Decrepify, essentially ruining one of the main purposes that you would potentially use Wrath for at all. Which makes it even worse. It has a tiny bit of magic damage and a tiny bit of lightning damage. Crushing Blow on it is relatively useless for Amazons because Crushing Blow, although it works for Amazons, it's at half capacity of normal, which makes it very ineffective for Amazons. Prevent Monster Heal is nice and Cannot Be Frozen is nice, but overall the bow itself is just a terrible bow. It has relatively no good stats on it. It's expensive. The one thing that it's good at, which is casting Decrepify, it has another curse on it that overwrites Decrepify and ruins the one purpose that it has. It's not good physically, so it's not a good physical damage bow. It's also not fast. In other words, it doesn't have high attack speed. If it had high attack speed, it could be redeemed as an elemental damage bow. But it doesn't have high attack speed either, so it's not a good elemental damage bow. It's neither a good elemental damage bow, it's neither a good budget choice, it's neither a good physical damage bow. It has no redeeming qualities whatsoever, and it is basically just garbage. Moving on to the next on the list is Zephyr, another bow. This one is a bow that unfortunately just doesn't really have a good place in the game. There are a lot of bows that you can potentially make for Amazon. You can make things like Melody. You can make things like Harmony. You can make an Insight bow. You can make some very good runeword bows, and there are also some very good unique bows, as well as even a couple set bows that are halfway decent. Zephyr falls in a very odd place where it basically has nothing that's going for it. It's a fast bow. It has 25% increased attack speed, but it also has relatively no enhanced damage, which means it's very poor as a physical damage bow. Even if you were to put it in a +3 bow and crossbow skill base, you'd probably be better off using that +3 bow and crossbow skill base for something else. It has a tiny bit of lightning damage, a tiny bit of negative targets defense, and most of that is just from the Ort and the Ethrune. And I can't help but wonder if you would just be better off in this particular case finding like a 6-socket bow, giving it to your low-level character, and just throwing in like an F and, you know, like whatever other elemental damage that you would want, and maybe a shale rune for the increased attack speed. Like, the stats on it are not great. It also is a relatively high-level bow. It is a level 21 bow for some reason, even though it should be a relatively low level bow. And if it was a relatively low level bow, it might be halfway decent as a rune word. But it comes into place at a extremely low level, which makes it just not really that great for anybody. Let me pull up the board on Zephyr so we can see the exact level of Zephyr. So Zephyr comes in at level 21. Now, 21 is only 3 levels before you have access to other good rune words. There's obviously a lot of good rune words that you could potentially put in bows. One of them in particular that has come into play with Diablo 2 Resurrected is the Insight bow. Insight is very high physical damage. It has meditation aura, has all sorts of other things, and it's only level 27. Which means 6 levels later, after you get access to the Zephyr bow, you get access to this wondrous thing, which is many, many, many factors times better than the Zephyr would ever be. And it's not even expensive at Raltir Tal Soul, Soul being the highest rune in the rune word. There's also a bunch of other options like Melody and Memory, which come in a little bit later, which are also pretty good at level 39 and at level 37. So when you're looking at this particular bow, you're thinking about it as a low-level bow. But at level 21, when you first get access to this bow, you get to use it for a whole 6 levels. And then as soon as you have the opportunity to switch to an Insight bow, you do. Because this bow is basically garbage. In most cases, you're probably better off using either a plain socketed bow with multiple like perfect gems or like Ral runes or Tal runes or something of that nature until you get to your Insight, or you could potentially go with a unique option like Ravenclaw and use Exploding Arrow and a bunch of other things. But this bow in particular just doesn't have anything really going for it. It's got faster run walk, attack speed, negative targets defense. The only special thing there is the faster run walk. That's it. And even then, you don't get that until level 21, and you're going to lose it as soon as you get to level 26. So Zephyr made it on the list as one of the garbage rune words. Another garbage rune word is a highly expensive and very stupid rune word called Wind. I have never seen anybody use this item, and there's a reason why I've never seen anybody use this item, because it sucks. It's expensive, and it sucks. Now, when I originally created Sanic the Dahooghag, which is my super fast running barbarian, I used 2 of these until I realized that I was an idiot for using these at all, because there was a better alternative to even these in terms of like faster run walk speed and just simply making the character go fast. The answer to that question was actually Craint Vomir, which actually has faster run walk on it as well. So Craint Vomir has faster run walk of 20%, and Wind has a faster run walk of 20%. On top of that, Craint Vomir has a increased attack speed of 50%, as well as slows target 35%, negative monster defense, and a blazing 10% physical damage increase. So when I originally made my Sanic Dahooghag and I used 2 winds, I was confident in my choice. And then when I saw that Craint Vomir was just a superior item in general and didn't cost an F in Sur rune, I was like, oh, okay, that's, you know, I was like, the Craint Vomir is just way better. I was like, let's just get 2 Eth Craint Vomirs, put some Zod runes in them, and call it a day. We'll have a hell of a lot more damage, attack faster, like run faster, and honestly, just in general, be a stronger character, which is amazing. Wind is not only not a very good item, it also has relatively low enhanced damage at only 150%. It has some very bad effects on it as well, like only 50 attack rating, which is not the most amazing. 10% chance to cast level 9 Tornado on striking is kind of interesting if you're a druid, but at the same time, Like, I don't ever see a druid making this piece of equipment. Hits blinds target is also interesting from a small perspective, but it also overwrites things like amplify damage, decrepify, lower resistance, and essentially makes it into a very poopy item for applying any curses to the target, including life tap. If you're doing Ubers, this would be awful for that as well, because it would override life tap. Actually, it might not override life tap on the bosses. It would override life tap on everything else, though. So you wouldn't get any life tap on like all of the trash mobs, but you would still get life tap on the bosses, because I don't think you can blind the bosses specifically. But it would still make it much harder to leech off of everything else in your vicinity besides the boss itself. And if you're a druid, for instance, and you're using abilities that attack everything on the screen, that could potentially mean your death. So Wind makes it onto the list as one of the worst Runewords in the game. It is too expensive. It doesn't really offer anything super special. There are unique items that are essentially better than it in just about every single way. And, yeah, it's a poopy. It's the poopies. Next on the list is another rune word. It's called Venom. Now, Venom can be made in more than just bows, I believe. But I made it in a bow because it's the best possible, like, creation for this item. Venom's problem is many. Number one, it costs a Malrune, and Malrunes are kind of expensive. They're basically half an ist. And early on in the game, you really just don't have a lot of Mals just to like throw around on a regular basis, which does make it a very odd option for a low-tier rune word. It also has ITD, ignores target's defense, which is mostly useless against anything other than trash mobs. If you ever like actually research how ignores target's defense works, is it doesn't really work versus elites. It doesn't work versus champions. It doesn't work versus bosses. It only works versus essentially like the garbage tier monsters that are in the game. So I guess at that small regard, it'll let you hit the target. It has a tiny bit of poison damage, which isn't really a lot by consideration to some of the higher poison damage items in the game. And 273 over 6 seconds is okay. 7% mana leech is practically useless on this bow because, well, it has no physical damage, which is one of the biggest issues. So while 7% mana leech seems like an interesting stat, because the bow itself has no enhanced damage on it whatsoever, it will do no physical damage, essentially. Not zero precisely, but it's essentially a ZP DPS weapon, which is a zero physical damage weapon. And you're not going to be doing any kind of real physical damage with this. It does have Prevent Monster Heal, which is very nice, and will actually stop most of the monsters from, dishing out damage, or sorry, regenerating their HP from the damage that you dished out. And that's good in combination with the poison because it allows the poison to work better, because then you won't have any regeneration. And before you say poison stops regeneration, no. Poison only stops regeneration if it consumes every single tick or bit on the monster. The monster has to be green for the regeneration to stop. Poison will often not turn monsters green, and in the case where the monster is not green, they will still regenerate. So the Prevent Monster Heal here will offer an opportunity for the monster to no longer regenerate when they stop turning green. And even if you attack all the time on the same monster, you will see the monster constantly shift between green and not green all the time. And this is because they're only green when every single bit of poison is consuming all 25 bits within a second. So if a single second is 25 bits and poison consumes all 25 of those bits, then the monster will be green. If the poison does not consume all 25 of those bits, then the monster is no longer green, and then they are regenerating during the bits that the poison has not consumed. Prevent Monster Heal completely prevents that, which allows you to essentially have a weapon that causes the poison to constantly do damage, and you won't ever have to worry about them regenerating. It also has Hit Causes Monster to Flee on it, which it makes it really poopy for any kind of melee character, so that's pretty much out entirely, which kind of relegates it as strictly to bows or maybe like a Blade Fury set. Overall, Venom is too expensive. It doesn't offer enough utility, and it's zero physical damage and essentially zero poison damage too from most regards. 273 is not enough, really, to do significant amounts of damage at the level that Venom requires. Now, why is Venom so high level? Well, Venom is high level because of the fact that it has a Malrune in it, which is one of its biggest issues. Because the Malrune requires the level requirement of itself to be essentially passed on to the item, Malrunes are level 49, which means that Venom doesn't get put into actual use until you're well into nightmare difficulty, at which point the monsters are relatively immune to the poison that you're pushing out, and most of them have like anywhere between like 20 to 50%, some of them as high as like 75% poison resistance, and this small amount of poison is not going to do much of anything. If you beef it up with other sources, you could potentially get more out of it, but you're probably better off just taking a bunch of Tal runes, honestly, and just putting them in like a 6-socket bow, because you get 75 poison damage over 5 seconds for each Tal rune. And if you take 6 poison Tal runes and you put them into a 6-socket bow, you're going to have a poison damage of 450. So for the low price of 6 Tal runes, you can have more poison damage than what Venom is offering you. And you can get Prevent Monster Heal in other places, like Hawanen's Belt, for instance, which is a really good option. And probably one of the best options for Prevent Monster Heal for just about any character. There's also other options for Prevent Monster Heal, like the Edge Bow, which is also a ZP DPS weapon, but has better usefulness than the Venom rune word, and is much cheaper. And I think it's really just this Malrune that holds the entire rune word back. I think if they took the Malrune out, lowered the level of this rune word a little bit, it might actually be something that people would want to make. But because the Malrune has a level requirement of 49, and also Malrunes are relatively hard to come by, it's just not good. What would I do to fix this rune word? Well, first off, I would change ignores targets defense to negative targets defense instead. Probably negative 50% targets defense, which would be the easiest way to fix like the fact that ignores targets defense doesn't work on some of the harder monsters in the game. The Mana Leech is wholly and utterly useless on this item because, of course, it has no physical damage. So if they want to keep the 0 physical damage, then they need to change this to something that is more useful, like mana after each kill, or mana taken, damage taken goes to mana, or there's a bunch of different options, like regenerate mana could potentially be better. But because there's no physical damage on this weapon, this is absolutely useless. These charges are useless too. Like, these charges are just trash. Nobody uses charges, especially when they're only like 11 charges. They cost too much money. I would change these charges to something more akin to a proccing effect. But the problem is that poison doesn't stack. So Poison Nova poison damage doesn't stack with the damage on the bow. So having multiple poisons here doesn't really help. I would probably remove these, and I would maybe put something on here like a 5% chance to proc like level 5 lower resistance or something. Because that would make it much more interesting in terms of a poison character, because even though the poison damage might not be better than, say, a 6-socketed Tal bow, if you had lower resistance on here to reduce the resistance of the poison on the monster, that could potentially, or the poison resistance on the monster, that could potentially bring it up a notch, right? And put it in a better place. Honestly, the whole rune word needs to be reworked in a better idea of, like, how can we make this into a really good poison item? Charges for poison skills do absolutely nothing because poison doesn't stack in multiple forms. If you guys are unaware of this, only one poison can ever be on a monster at any given time. And the highest tick rate poison is the one that works. Not the highest damage poison, the highest tick rate poison. And the highest tick rate poison can even overwrite a much longer and much more deadly poison in the process, which makes these charges almost actually bad from that regard as well. Because say, for instance, you had a poison that was like 2,000 poison damage, but the tick rate was a little lower than the Poison Nova, which is doing like 500 poison damage. The 500 from Poison Nova will overwrite your 2,000, and then you're going to have to reapply it. And this is the problem with having multiple types of poison on an item. So instead of poison on here, they should probably put something like lower resist proc, because that would be more in line with the idea of dishing out poison and might actually make people interested in using it. And if they want to keep the Malrune in here and the level 49 level, then lower resist proc makes sense, because at level 49, having access to a low level procking lower resist would be absolutely amazing for tons of characters, including sorceresses, but would be especially useful for poison-based characters like rabies druids, a poison Amazon, which there definitely are some very good poison Amazons. There's a lot of various ways that you can potentially dish out poison damage, like poison javelin, plague javelin, rabies. We've also got poison nova. You might even, well, necromancers already have lower res, so they don't need it. Probably up the poison damage a little bit too. 273 over 6 seconds isn't really that amazing. I'd probably put it somewhere more around like 500 over 12 seconds, or like 1,000 over 12 seconds or something like that. Increase the number of seconds by a large degree, and increase the damage by a large degree, so that the tick rate is still relatively around the same, but so that it lasts longer on targets. The whole idea of this is to apply a massive amount of poison to a target and the target die, and this one just doesn't really fulfill that role, which is why Venom is basically just trash. Moving on to the next one on the list is Famine. Famine is one of those runewords that looks kind of cool from a very like strict perspective of like, hey, the stats on this are actually kind of neat. It's got increased attack speed. It's got enhanced damage, which isn't bad. It's got ignores target's defense, which, as we talked about earlier, ignores target's defense isn't really the most amazing. It does have a relatively large amount of elemental damage on it, which is okay. The main problem with this weapon is that it is, number one, very expensive. At Fal Om Ort Ja, only one low rune in this recipe, and it has one mid rune and 2 high runes in it. The other problem is that it can only be made in axes or hammers, which highly restricts basically what you can put this in, and it makes it into this like ridiculous item that nobody wants to make. Number one, Berserker axes and basically all endgame axes have relatively garbage durability, and they are just absolutely trash in terms of like swinging very fast. Now, if you have a high elemental damage weapon, you want to swing fast. That's how these items work. Because every time you swing, you're going to apply that elemental damage, and applying the elemental damage quickly is always better than applying the elemental damage slowly, because the elemental damage doesn't change based on the speed of your weapon. It only stays the same. So if you can attack 5 times a second, you can apply that 200, 200, 250, and 200 5 times per second, which is obviously better. But since it has extremely low durability, any build that would take advantage of a very fast attacking build would basically just be pointless, because you'd be in town repairing it all the time. The other option for Famine is hammers, which are extremely slow and probably the exact opposite of anything you would ever want to put this item in. They don't have the worst durability, but they don't really have the best durability either, and they would also have problems breaking all the time. But that's not the end of Famine's woes. Famine is also presented with a myriad of other options that are honestly better than this weapon. So if you were trying to make a character that had high elemental damage, you wouldn't want to use Famine. You would most likely use Gimmershred. Gimmershred is a much higher physical damage elemental damage than Famine will ever be. Now, on the surface, you might think to yourself, well, but Ginger, Famine has higher physical damage. So if I want physical damage as well as elemental damage, then I'm better off using Famine. The problem with that logic is that Gimmershred can be ethereal, and you can regenerate it constantly using Throwing Mastery, which means that you can have a barbarian using 2 of these and essentially just constantly regenerating them on a Throwing Mastery character, or just putting points in Throwing Mastery themselves. You don't even really need more than like 1 point in Throwing Mastery and a high amount of Deadly Strike, which is actually pretty easy to obtain. So you can run ethereal Gimmershreds, which have an exceedingly higher physical damage and an exceedingly higher elemental damage than Famine will ever have. There are also other options that you could potentially use, like you could potentially use Baronera Star. Baronera's Star is also elemental damage, and it doesn't have as much as Famine, but it is a higher physical damage item. The reason why Baronera's Star wins in physical damage is because, again, it can be ethereal. You can run an ethereal Baronera's Star, which is 50% increased attack speed, by the way, and it has a durability of 172, which far exceeds the durability of Famine. It has a relatively nice amount of elemental damage on it, and it can be ethereal, and you can put a Zod rune in it, which makes Baronera's Star much higher damage than the Berserker X Famine. In general, Famine has no place within the game. It has better options, which are much cheaper, by the way. And a Zod rune is much cheaper than a Jaw or an Ohm. In fact, Zods tend to be around like Vex, I believe, usually in trade value at some point. So if you are trying to use an elemental damage setup and you want the highest elemental damage, Famine isn't it. If you want higher physical damage in combination with your elemental damage, Famine isn't it. Both Gimmershred and Baronera's Star offer better options at a cheaper price than Famine can offer. Overall, Famine is just a failure of a rune word. It does not have anything that any other options could potentially warrant. It is too expensive and honestly just garbage. I never, ever, ever recommend making a Famine at all. Now, the last one is a little bit of a contentious option, and it is something that I'm sure, I am positive, people will fight me over. But I'm going to explain myself as much as I possibly can so that you understand my logic and my reasoning when it comes to this particular rune word. And this is Pride. Pride is one of these rune words that, number one, is very expensive. At Cham Sur Io Low, it basically has no low runes in it. Io could be considered a low rune by the strictest interpretations, but ever since Bulwark came about, people usually spam Ios into bulwarks and cures and all sorts of various things on a regular basis. And it's not until late ladder that they become super common and everybody has like 5 or 6 of them in the stash. So it's not exactly a cheap rune word by any measure of the stretch of the imagination. Cham Sur Low is very expensive. It also doesn't really have much utility compared to other options. So as a item with a ZPT DPS, this is a ZP DPS item. It has basically no physical damage on it. So if you look at it on the surface, you see that it has level 20 concentration aura, which is a very high physical damage increaser. It also has 20% Deadly Strike, which increases physical damage. It also has 300% bonus attack rating, which makes it so that the hits land more often. And it even has hits blinds target, freezes target, and a bunch of other things on it, which unfortunately don't really help at all. The main issue is that it doesn't have any physical damage to increase. The damage to demons, the concentration aura, the deadly strike, all of those are meaningless when you're multiplying a very low number. And Pride does that. It multiplies a very low number. It's like, oh, look, my Merc is doing 20 damage. And then it's like, yeah, but we got concentration and demon damage and we got deadly strike. And after all that, he's doing a whole 100. Yeah, he's doing 100 damage now. Like, maybe even 200. Like, if he gets a crit. Yeah. And this is the point at which you look at Pride and you have to think to yourself, okay, well, it makes my mercenary into a trash merc. It causes him to freeze targets, which is definitely a bad thing for mercenaries, because in general, if you are playing a necromancer, which was one of the main characters that uses this item, by the way, I'm not completely out of the loop. One of the main characters that uses Pride is the necromancer because he wants to beef up his army. Same thing with the summoning druid also uses this because they want to beef up their army. The problem with this is that it's not the best option for either of those. So if you need to enhance the damage of your necromancer's army, or if you need to enhance the damage of your druid's army, it's actually better to reduce the defense of the monster to increase the overall hit rate instead of increasing their damage. The main issue with most of the minions in the game is that their attack rating is so bad that they miss the majority of their attacks. If you reduce the defense of the monster, they start hitting more often, and if they hit more often, the overall DPS of your army goes up tremendously. This has been tested, and it has been proven. The concentration aura does not beat Infinity with the huge amount of negative defense that Infinity offers. On top of that, it also brings down their resistances, which can help out like the Druid cold spirit wolves, which do cold damage, the necromancers, mages, and any kind of elemental summons that you might get through reviving. If you're utilizing an enchant merc also, or you have a sorceress on hand to enchant your army, and they're dishing out fire damage, the Infinity also enhances that as well by decreasing the fire resistance of the monster and obviously increasing the fire damage that your minions are doing. The concentration aura does not beat better options. It also gimps the merc. Your merc is now basically trash and cannot survive anymore. Yes, if you have an army, he might be better off because he's able to survive inside the pack of the army, but if he takes on a monster himself, he will often just die because he has essentially no survivability with this weapon. There's no physical damage, which means he has no physical leech. There's no physical leech, he's not healing himself. And if he's not healing himself, he's going to die. The only usefulness that this item has, as far as I am aware, is a passive sorceress. The 25% chance to cast level 17 Firewall when struck is actually really cool for a passive sorceress build, and I actually saw a video basically with a passive sorceress using this to kill Ubers, believe it or not. They essentially just set their sorceress up to be nigh invincible and let basically the 3 Ubers spawn an entire army around them, at which point they were hit repeatedly by this army, which spawned a huge number of firewalls around them, which did a massive portion of the damage, which ended up killing the Ubers. And very cool build. But one passive sorceress build does not make this item good. I do not recommend ever making this item. I do not think it has any real purpose within the game, and I'm sure I'm going to get negative feedback on this, but don't make this item. Make an Infinity instead. I hate to say this, but it's so expensive that at a Cham, a Sir, and a Low rune, that you would be better off using that Cham, Sir, and Low rune for anything else, including an Infinity, or a Grief, or a Plague, or a Grief and a Plague, because I'm pretty sure you could make a Grief and a Plague with what you have here in a Pride. And there are tons of better options that you could potentially use for this particular thing. I personally think that if you cannot afford a Infinity yet, you're probably just better off making an Obedience Mancatcher until you get to the Infinity, because having a strong mercenary on a Necromancer, having a strong mercenary on a Summon Druid is very important. Like, he can be like one of your main DPS, you know, like minions, essentially. Because if you give him a very strong weapon, an ethereal, you know, like Mancatcher Obedience, he can literally annihilate monsters for you. And this is not it. It has no Crushing Blow. Infinity does. It has no Open Wounds. There's tons of other options that have open wounds. It has no life leech, and even if it did have life leech, it doesn't have any way of restoring life because it has no physical damage. It overall just is a really bad option. It freezes targets and destroys corpses if you're on a Necromancer, which is also bad. Hits blinds target also interferes with curses, which means that if you're using things like amplified damage to crepify, lower resistance to increase the damage of your minions or yourself, he is going to be constantly overriding your curses on monsters as well. And this is why the Pride polearm, or the Pride runeword, has made it into my top 10 worst runewords in the game. I think that pretty much covers everything, guys. Let me know what you think about the list. Do you disagree with any of my choices? Are you going to fight with me in the comments about adding Pride to the top 10 worst runewords in the game? Feel free. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching. Be sure to hit that like button and the subscribe button if you enjoy the content. And as always, hold on, I got to clear the trash. Keep watching.